Precautions for engine disassembly. 1. To facilitate disassembly and prevent component deformation due to overtemperature, be sure to allow the diesel engine to cool down before disassembling it. 2. Be sure to do cleaning before the disassembly. During the disassembly, also pay attention to keeping the work area neat and clean, and avoid human environment. 3. Always use special and standard tools for disassembly and avoid rough handling during the disassembly. 4. During the disassembly, protect the engine reliably to avoid damage to parts and engine block mating surface. Heavy parts, such as crankshaft, flywheel housing, etc., should be removed and placed properly to avoid personal injuries. 5. Unless otherwise specified, the bolts need to be symmetrically unscrewed in order from the middle to two sides, and some special bolts are not allowed to be reused. 6. Pay attention to sorting out the removed parts and place matching parts in pairs according to their numbers to avoid incorrect reassembly. 7. During the disassembly, if any, fuel or oil flowing out should be collected with a suitable container and cleared professionally for the sake of environmental protection. One. Fan. Undo the 6 M8 by 20 fixing bolts with 13 mm socket and remove fan. Note that if the engine is equipped with a silicone oil fan, always place it vertically to prevent silicone oil from flowing out. 2. Peripheral accessories and pipelines. 1. Loosen the hoop on the rubber hose of the intercooler pipe with a 10 mm socket. Undo the fixing bolts on the two brackets in turn and remove the intercooler pipe. 2. Loosen the heavy-duty hoop on the turbocharger air outlet elbow with a 10 mm wrench and remove the turbocharger air outlet elbow. Check whether the O-ring is in good condition. 3. Pull out the air outlet pipe of the oil-gas separator. 4. Loosen the clamps of the oil return pipe of the oil-gas separator with a 10 mm wrench and pull out the oil return pipe of the oil-gas separator. 3. Oil dipstick assembly. Loosen the hoop of oil dipstick with a 10 mm wrench and then loosen the plug of the oil dipstick assembly and gently pull out the oil dipstick assembly. 4. Low pressure fuel pipe. 1. Unscrew the fixing bolt with a wrench and remove the low pressure fuel pipe. 2. Insert the hollow bolts into the protective jacket and screw them into the fuel inlet and outlet port of the fuel pump to prevent dust from entering fuel passage. 3. Remove the oil inlet and return pipes of fuel pump. 5. Fuel filter. Loosen the fixing bolts of the primary fuel filter seat with a torque wrench and remove the water separator assembly, fuel primary filter and mounting seat assembly. Loosen the bolts of fuel fine filter with a torque wrench and remove the fuel fine filter. 6. Fuel pump accelerator cable bracket. Loosen the fixing bolts of smoke limiter air inlet pipe and remove the fuel pump accelerator cable bracket. 7. Intake manifold. Unscrew the fixing bolts of intake manifold with a 13 mm socket and remove the intake manifold. 8. Thermostat. Loosen the fixing bolt of the thermostat water inlet pipe hoop with a 10 mm wrench. Unscrew the fixing bolt of water outlet pipe with a 10 mm socket and a 13 mm socket, and remove the water outlet pipe and thermostat assembly. 9. High-pressure fuel pipe. Loosen the high-pressure fuel pipes at the fuel injector side and the high-pressure fuel pump side. Remove the high-pressure fuel pipe assembly and install the dust cover on high-pressure fuel pump to prevent entry of dust. 10. Fuel injection pump. Turn the flywheel until the coupling lock bolt faces outward. Loosen the coupling lock bolt with an 18 mm socket. Note that this bolt is locked by thread glue. Loosen the fixing bolts of fuel injection pump coupling with a 13 mm socket and a 16 mm socket, and remove the fuel injection pump assembly. 11. Fuel injection pump fixing bracket. Loosen the fixing bolts of the fuel injection pump fixing bracket with a torque wrench and remove the fuel injection pump fixing bracket. 12. Starter. Loosen the fixing nut of the starter and remove the starter horizontally. 13. Alternator. Release the automatic tension pulley with a torque wrench and remove the alternator belt. Loosen the alternator adjusting bolt with a torque wrench and remove the alternator. 14. Water pump belt. Insert a torque wrench into the guide hole of tension pulley and remove the pump belt. 15. Automatic tensioner. Loosen the fixing bolt of tension pulley with a 24 mm socket and remove the tensioner. 16. Oil gas separator. Loosen the fixing bolt of hoop at the gas inlet of the oil gas separator and remove the oil gas separator assembly. 17. Water pump. Loosen the two fixing bolts of water pump T with a 13 mm socket and remove the water pump T connector. Loosen the nut in the water pump and then the fixing bolts of the water pump and remove the water pump. 18. Vibration damper. Loosen the 8 fixing bolts on the vibration damper with a 16 mm socket. Remove the pulley and take down the vibration damper. 19. Air compressor gear cover. Loosen the fixing bolts of the air compressor gear cover with a torque wrench and take out the air compressor gear cover. 20. Air compressor gear. Screw two M10 by 60 bolts into the air compressor drive gear hole. Pull out the air compressor gear, undo the fixing bolts of air compressor drive gear, and remove the air compressor drive gear. 21. Air compressor. Loosen the 7 fixing bolts in the air compressor with a 13 mm socket, and then loosen the 2 bolts on the air compressor gear chamber and remove the air compressor. 22. Heat shield. Loosen the fixing bolts of heat shield and remove the heat shield. 23. Turbocharger. Loosen the oil inlet pipe, oil return pipe, and their 4 fixing bolts, and remove the turbocharger oil inlet pipe. Loosen the fixing bolts of turbocharger and remove the turbocharger assembly. 24. Exhaust manifold. Loosen the fixing bolts of exhaust manifold with a 16 mm socket and remove the exhaust manifold. 25. Oil filter. Remove the intercooler fixing bracket, loosen the fixing bolts of oil filter, and remove the oil filter seat and oil filter. 26. Oil cooler. Loosen the fixing bolts of the oil cooler cover with a 13 mm socket and a 21 mm socket, and remove the oil cooler cover. Loosen the 4 fixing bolts of oil cooler core and remove the oil cooler core. 27. Fuel injector return pipe. Unscrew the 6 fixing bolts of fuel injector return pipe and remove the fuel injector return pipe. 28. Fuel injector. Unscrew the fixing bolts of fuel injector pressure plate with a 13 mm socket, take out the pressure plate, and pull out the 6 fuel injectors in turn. 29. Rocker arm assembly. Loosen the fixing bolts of each valve chamber cover and remove the valve chamber covers in turn. Loosen the fixing bolts of rocker arm seat with an 18 mm socket, remove the rocker arm seat assemblies in turn, and take out the valve push rod. 30. Cylinder head. Loosen the auxiliary fixing nuts of cylinder head with an 18 mm socket. Loosen the main bolts of cylinder head with a 24 mm socket. Take out 21 nuts of cylinder head, remove the pressure plate, remove the 24 main bolts of cylinder head, and remove the cylinder head. Note that the cylinder head shall not be placed with its bottom downward. 31. Valve tappet. Take off the 6 cylinder head gaskets in turn and take out 12 valve tappets with the help of 3 valve push rods. 32. Crankshaft front oil seal. Loosen the fixing bolts of front cover plates of the timing gear chamber with a 13 mm socket and a 16 mm socket and remove them. Take down the cover of the front gear chamber. Remove the crankshaft front oil seal seat. Take down the front oil seal seat. Install the engine into the turnover frame and turn it by 180 degrees so that the oil sump faces upwards. 33. Oil sump. Unscrew the 12 fixing bolts of oil sump and remove the bracket and oil sump. 34. Oil pump. Loosen the 3 fixing bolts of oil pump and then loosen the fixing bolts of oil pump idler shaft with a 16 mm socket. Pull out the oil pump idler shaft with a special tool. Take out the idler shaft and idler gear and remove the oil pump. 35. Camshaft gear. Loosen the 4 fixing bolts of camshaft gear with a 13mm socket. For the convenience of removal, install 2 M8x30 jack screws on gear shaft, tighten them evenly and symmetrically with a wrench to remove the gear. 36. Camshaft. Loosen the 2 bolts on the camshaft thrust plate. For the convenience of removal, install 2 assistant bolts on the camshaft and turn them by a certain angle to remove the thrust plate, and then remove the camshaft. 37. Intermediate gear. Loosen the 4 fixing bolts of intermediate gear shaft with a 16mm socket. Take out the intermediate gear cover, pull out the intermediate gear shaft with a special tool, and take out the intermediate gear. 38. Timing gear chamber. Loosen the 10 fixing bolts of the timing gear chamber and remove the timing gear chamber. 39. Flywheel. Unscrew the 9 fixing bolts of flywheel with a 21mm socket and remove the flywheel. 40. Flywheel housing. Unscrew the 13 fixing bolts of flywheel housing with an 18mm socket and remove the flywheel housing. Turn the engine block by 90 degrees. 41. Piston and connecting rod assembly. Loosen the fixing bolts of connecting rod for the second cylinder with a 21mm socket. Remove the big end cap and align a wooden bar with the connecting rod of the second cylinder to push out the piston of the second cylinder. Operate in the same way to remove the big end caps and pistons of other cylinders in turn and assemble them together according to the number. Turn the engine block by 90 degrees so that the oil sump faces upwards. 42. Crankcase. Unscrew the 27 bolts of crankcase with a 13mm socket and unscrew the 14 bolts of main bearing with a 27mm socket. Knock out the 3 crankcase dowel pins. Note that the middle dowel pin is slightly shorter towards the cylinder head and remove the crankcase with the help of 4 assistant bolts. 43. Crankshaft. Take out the lower main bearing of crankshaft, carry out the crankshaft, and take the upper main bearing of crankshaft. 44. Oil nozzle. Loosen the fixing bolts of oil nozzles and remove the 6 oil nozzles in turn. Turn the engine block by 180 degrees so that the oil sump faces downwards. 45. Cylinder liner. Pull out the cylinder liner of the first cylinder with the cylinder liner puller and operate in the same way to pull out the cylinder liners of other cylinders in turn.